channel. So without further ado, let me hand over to Tracy Stuckrath from Thrive Meetings and Events. A warm welcome, Tracy, and over to you.
Thank you, Kate. I appreciate that. Okay, so before we get started talking about the new identity of food and beverage, I want to know, Kate sent me the list ahead of time, so we've got some planners here and we've got some venues and event managers and properties. What is this is a very open-ended question, but what is your biggest challenge or your biggest concern with food and beverage as currently in COVID, in the pandemic, and going forward? Put it in the chat box or raise your hand. You could raise your hand. I think, Kate, are they allowed to raise their hand? So I can see, because I want to make sure that we're addressing them all.
Yeah, so all the comments will go into the chat box, Tracy, and I'll feed them from there.
Okay. So,
and Tracy, you just need to share your screen.
Okay, yep. I just want to see what the answers are to my question before I share my screen. How to feed 500 passenger people at the same time. Oscar, that is just asking a lot. Okay, service styles and sustainability. All right, anybody else? All right, we're just gonna, then I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna assume what you wanna know. Okay, Nancy, we serve a lot of buffet luncheons. Watching for updates on how this will be handled going forward. Additional service fees with multiple lines. Offering variety and inclusive menus in grab and go. That's, Nancy, that's another good topic. Okay, so we're gonna go with those, and that pretty much is kind of where have been talking about, or what I'm gonna plan on talking about anyway. So share my screen here, and when I do this, I will not be able to see the chat, so Kate, just pop me if there's somebody that needs me to address something or has a question. So I'm gonna hit play. So the new identity of event, food, and beverage. And this is a statement that I say in every single one of my presentations, probably for the last 10 years, is that eating is a universal experience. It's the one thing that we all have to do and we all share. So it's our common ground. And even with COVID, we need to maintain that same universal experience. And I think it's actually even more important now as we bring people together in how we're providing that experience, because we still all have to eat and we still want to share that experience. And so I'm going to give you some examples that I've been hearing from hoteliers and meeting planners over the last couple of weeks and months on what they're doing, and actually a few from the last 2 weeks, because people are starting to go back to meeting and what they've been doing. So we're going to talk about how that happens. And again, another thing that I want to, implore is that we do have a duty of care when we're designing our events, and that does include food and beverage and how we're doing that. And I think COVID has really brought that to light in what we have to do. I did a presentation back in June, and I asked the attendees of that presentation, how many of you had asked about food service or food safety before COVID? And 71% of them said never. And that number to me is very enlightening in two ways. In one, that it shows that the meeting planners trusted the food service partners to handle food safety. They made that assumption, which 99% of the time is good, that food safety practices were being handled. But it also shows that we need to do our due diligence at the same time, because that 1%, or maybe if it's even more, that they weren't doing their due diligence, and we weren't paying attention to that. And we need to pay attention to that, because with food allergies, and as Nancy mentioned, all the different dietary restrictions, that falls under duty of care, and understanding what our partners can do is really important. Which then I'm going to jump to that responsibility here, is that this event food chain is everyone, from our attendee who's attending, and they have a lot more different needs going forward, a new way to look at the inclusion aspect of our food and beverage experiences, to the meeting organizer, to the sales team, and the catering services. And in some instances, they're one and the same at the moment. Chefs and line cooks, and they again are probably one and the same, or they're being outsourced depending on the property because of staffing and banquet captains and banquet servers. So that the responsibility behind that duty of care, I think, is a little bit more of a Rubik's Cube in trying to figure it out, because we're short on staff because of furloughs and layoffs. So we have to figure out how we're going to manage that. And our whole goal is to provide safe settings. And I was talking to Michael Dominguez yesterday in my Eating at a Meeting podcast, and one of the executive chef, who's also the director of operations, I think it was at Fontainebleau in Florida, was saying that, and I've been saying this for months now, is that food safety has always been here. And that 71% of people who never ask the questions is because the food safety, our food service providers were actually providing the correct food safety practices that we come to understand. But we have to, in light of COVID, think about a variety of different things now as well. But the safe settings include thinking about the hazards and threats, which are kind of a little bit different now. Worker safety, not only our attendee safety, but our employees' safety. Disseminating health and safety advice. And that's a little bit touchy, because if you're not an EMT or you're not a doctor, giving out advice is not prudent to do. But if you give out the advice that the CDC has given out, and the FDA and the World Health Organization, as well as maybe hiring or having someone on staff that actually is an EMT or a doctor that can give additional advice as a partner of yours, that can be done that way. Looking at locations and what the different standards are in going forward with opening, like the other day, Las Vegas, I think today actually Las Vegas opens for 1,000 people, under 1,000 people for an event, but still following the CDC guidelines. But also looking at where I live in New Bern, North Carolina, which is Eastern North Carolina. If you look at the state statistics, New Bern's infection rate and of COVID is very small compared to Charlotte. So the states are being lumped together, but if you're going specifically, you need to drill down to that state or to that city as well. And then of course, guest safety. And then again, just talking about food safety is the food code and what that standard is. So hopefully all of my properties here that are on here have their Serve Safe certifications, or whatever that equivalent is in Canada, in Toronto, and in the UK, making sure you're doing that. The other day I was talking to a property in Dallas, and they've laid off all of their culinary team and all of their service team. So the general manager is serving, the director of sales and marketing is serving food and beverage. They're doing all the cleaning up. And because of that, they all went and got their food handler certifications as well. So they know what they're doing and they understand the policies and procedures around providing safe food and beverage. So if you're a planner, asking those questions, and Kate, remind me, I'll put a link up to some questions that you can ask about food safety. I wrote it for North Star Meetings Group. I'll give you the link to that, but asking those questions. And if you're the property, Sean and Nancy and Oscar is like being able to answer those questions in advance, saying, hey, planner, here's what we're doing, providing that information to them in advance so that you're communicating clearly what you're doing. But going back to the food safety practices, prohibiting sick people from coming to work, which we've all been hearing, strict hand washing practices, singing happy birthday or something else while you're washing your hands, at least for 20 seconds, clean and sanitization procedures, a food safety manager on site at all times. And so I think it's really important planner wise, asking that question, who is that person, as well as venue side saying, this is our person. This will be the person that's helping you or working with you, and this is what we're doing. I think, and we'll talk about communication a little bit, but this is really, really important as we go forward of what food and beverage is going to be. People are going to be concerned about it. A lot of properties are getting and then our catering companies and rental companies are getting certifications by their hotel property. The ALHI Safe Stay program. The venues are getting the GBAC Star Facility. American Rental Association has now one Clean, Safe, and Essential on cleaning the equipment when it comes back to the rental companies. Oscar and Mark from Canada and UK, I would love to know what other certifications are you seeing in your countries, because I know these are really US based, but what are you seeing that people can actually do to communicate that they've done safe practices? If you share that with me and the rest of us, that would be great in the chat. Kitchen practices. Yesterday, again, talking with Michael Dominguez, and this is a busy kitchen. This is a nice big kitchen. Probably could be one of the kitchens in one of the IAC properties, but now we have to think about the social distancing in that kitchen, and that also includes storage and how much is being stored in the refrigerators and the freezers, and getting that into the spaces. You have to space out your kitchen staff if you have the space, doing the 6-foot distancing, but you also have to minimize the routes to all the different storage facilities. Are you doing more scratch, or are you doing more, pre-packaged, pre-designed food and beverage that you're bringing in because of reduced staff? So, thinking about how that is working, and then also thinking about vendors that are coming into your properties. We've been hearing a lot about bubbles, staff bubbles or NBA bubbles or whatever, right? So who is coming into that bubble as your vendors? Your food service providers, are you testing them as they walk through the door, or are they bringing the food to the door and then your staff is bringing it in? So those kitchen practices. One director of sales and marketing that I was talking to the other day, she was telling me, and this is a big box property in Orlando, they're doing jobs in different departments that they weren't doing before. They had an excessive amount of staff, not excessive, but they had a larger amount of staff than they do now. So everybody's wearing different hats. And same thing with smaller properties, which are typically the IAC properties, you're probably wearing a lot of different hats. So how can you be more strategic with what you're doing to streamline your processes across the board, from the back of the house and including the front of the house as well? So thinking about what those kitchen practices are with serving and plating and sous videing, if you can do that, doing some sous vide and then making it happen. And or one property I was talking to in Dallas, I think I mentioned it earlier, they're completely outsourced their food and beverage to a catering company. And they are partnering with one, and they are allowing people to bring in a different caterer if they want to at a very big upcharge. But my question, is introducing them to that bubble. If you've got that one catering partner that you can use and you trust, and they're doing the practices that you have, that's really keen and a safer environment than potentially letting, a choice vendor, the vendor of choice for the planner to bring in. So thinking about those two things as well. Okay, next slide. Oops. Food sourcing and cost. This is one thing that I have been really kind of paying attention to, and sourcing of our food, because we've had the supply and demand of our food system has really been taxed lately, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. Farmers were retailing their food into their crops, into their land, and they were also dumping out milk. and because they had no place to sell it. And that was because they had a different distribution model, trying to get it to food banks and directly to people in grocery stores. And that added a lot of different contexture to that service method to them. So understanding where we're coming from, and it's a little volatile still. You know, the meat scarcity was, there was a meat scare that a lot of the workers in the meat plants were getting COVID and they were losing their staff from that. So they weren't processing as much, but then balancing it out. So it's really important that we stay on top of that, vendor wise or supplier side, as well as meeting planner side, is understanding that. And at the very beginning of COVID, I did hear something from the Asian markets that they weren't going to be accepting any new clients for rice, for exporting rice and some of their other commodities, because they didn't want to, they didn't have the capacity to do that. So understanding our food sourcing and our cost is really important. And if you've been paying attention to your grocery bill, you know, eggs have gone up. My mom mentioned it the other day. She's like, and my mom is buying eggs now when they're on sale. She buys 2 or 3 dozen when she sees them on sale, the ones that we like. So because the prices are rising. So whatever's happening in the grocery store is probably going to be happening and being related to us here in our food service. But one thing Michael Dominguez actually pointed out to me yesterday, I made a good point of, is that because our meetings, at especially IAC meetings, you're smaller, you're able to, you don't need a large abundance of, you know, food and beverage for some of these meetings. But even in the big box, when our meetings are smaller, that gives us a little bit more of a level playing field, that we don't need the large amount of food and beverage that we had. So playing with that, balancing that out, and that will also impact our costs. And hopefully, you know, we're buying less, we're being more diligent with what we're making. And because we're serving in different styles, it's going to be a big win for lack of food waste. Touching on the food supply again, you know, talking to your suppliers, you know, prepping and cooking, how are you doing that? The transportation from the farm to the actual kitchen where you're doing it, storage and training, especially if you've got new staff, like the director of sales who's doing some banquet stuff, or doing, you know, some receiving the food and beverage at the door. What kind of training do they need to know about that before you put them in that job? So really having some good standard operating procedures is going to be important. So food service, this is a big one. Oscar, you're the one that is, how am I going to feed 500 people at one time? That's going to be really challenging and really, really creative, depending on the size of your venue and what, as we go into winter. Right now it's beautiful here in North Carolina and it would be great for an outdoor event. But we go further into the season, it's going to be a little bit chillier and not being, you know, limited on being able to use outside space. So we've got to be more creative on inside. We will definitely not be seeing servers without masks and without gloves bringing food. That is going to be a standard going forward. You know, when we're presenting our food and beverage to our attendees. So front of house, because we've got a lack of, or not a lack of, we have a lack of staffing, right? So understanding what we're doing and who is doing what and expediting that. Again, you know, where are their uniforms? I was talking to, the IAC property in Princeton, New Jersey. She was on the webinar earlier in April with me, but you know, talking about uniforms. Typically servers took their uniforms home and washed them on their own. A lot of she was looking at actually keeping the uniforms and washing them for them so that the uniforms were maintained and managed to be clean for every single event. And the other part of that front of house staffing too is being very strategic. There's properties that are on the weekends are 98% occupancy. These are more resort properties. and then 10% during the week because they don't have any group business. So being strategic about that staffing, and if you're a planner, being cognizant of that as well, because we have to manage, if the property doesn't have the business for the whole week, they're going to have limited staff to bring in to help with that event. So we have to be patient and understanding and work together on how this is all going to work. But it's really important on educating the front of the house and the back of the house on, how it's going to be, the food is going to be served. What is the information on the banqueted event order? What are you serving? Talking to Murray Hall back in May, about dietary restrictions, he goes, it's even more important, or not more important, but it's just as important with this pandemic to maintain those dietary restrictions, and also to understand and create menu items that meet multiple dietary needs, because a lot of properties are minimizing their menu options to make it easier on the smaller staff size. Instead of having 50 menu items, you might have 10 or 15 menu items to choose from in the different categories. So that helps with reducing waste, but also helps in managing those menus. These service styles are definitely going to be gone for a while. That self-serve buffet, and the self-serve buffet on the top and on the right here, we're not going to see that server without a mask on. She does have gloves on, which is great, but it's not going to be pick it up and, eat it yourself. It will be served by attendants. And the plated meals, a lot of plated meals are now coming with the plate cover on top of them as they come out, to reduce that transmission opportunity from the kitchen to the table. These are some pictures that I took on the one on the left is Costco. That's when you check out. The greeter there is basically enclosed in a sneeze guard. When she's checking you hand her your receipt through the sneeze guard to check it, and then she lets you go. On the right-hand side, this is a buffet at a airport lounge where was I? That is in Denver. And it was all self-serve. What I did not like, or I don't know if it wasn't, I didn't like, it was unusual for me to see that there was no server at all anywhere to be found. I think I could hear them behind the door chatting, but there was not anybody there to answer questions or to refresh or to clean up, which I thought that was very unusual and disconcerting to some people. This here is a sneeze, two examples of sneeze guards. The one on the right is my YMCA, what they did at their registration desk, which is what we will be seeing at a lot of properties. The one on the left is a sneeze guard that was designed by a rental company, and you can see that it actually attaches to the table, and that so that it doesn't fly away, which is great. One thing that I want to mention on the sneeze guards, and here's a piece of plexiglass that I got from Lowe's, Home Depot, and I had my neighbor write a menu on this sneeze guard, and I just have the white paper here so you can easily see it. But I want you to make these sneeze guards not so stale and boring and ugly and saying, stay away from me. I want you to have fun with it. I even had her put my name on here. That would be great for the server that's behind the scenes to say, hey, I'm Tracy. I'm serving you. And this sticker, Go NC State, these are great for sponsorship opportunities on these plexiglass walls. That they do take 5 to 7 days to get printed, just so you know, but you can use that as well for sponsorship opportunities and or for printing your menus. And if you're going to have standard menus that you're going to use all the time, why not get it printed on a sticky like this, and then you can put it on a sneeze guard as well. Or if you've got somebody that's got great handwriting, write that out. Let's see, next one. My friends at Spring USA, interviewed or chatted with Christine from the CEO of Spring USA a couple of weeks ago in my podcast. And so she was sharing some ideas that some of her customers were using with their products. So I was going to show you some of those. Disclaimer, I do not get any money from them. I'm just showing you some options here. But this is an induction cooking station, which is mobile, which is great. So oh, you can't see my finger, but the centerpiece comes out, it can be rolled out of that, and you still have that buffet. They did note that this is actually in the times that we are, you should put up a sneeze guard, which I'll show you in a minute. There are options of sneeze guards. Put a sneeze guard up on here. But that silver, that metal piece in the middle is actually a filtration system, so that it takes the air, whatever the vapors coming off of the cooking equipment is sucked into that filtration system. Hilton hotels, I don't know which ones specifically, are using these as well and calling them pods to actually take them around. Because they're mobile, they can be used in different areas, but it's creating that distance between the chef and the attendee, but also creating, an option for an action station. Here's how it actually rolls out of that station and can be stored. Here is an example of their sneeze guards. These are fully enclosed sneeze guards. It's got the top, the two sides, and it goes completely around the chef or the person, the attendant that's cooking there. You will see here, and this was noted to me on from another property in Milwaukee last week, is that they've positioned the chafing dishes so that the lid goes towards the attendee versus, typically when we're on the lid opens to the side like that. So they're with that intention of actually adding an extra barrier as well between the attendee and the food, which I think the sneeze guard's going to protect it enough, but just an added benefit of it. The server will then can actually place the plate on top of this sneeze guard, so there's no contact between the two individuals. The attendee can lift up and put grab the plate off of the top of that sneeze guard. On that note, accessibility wise, if you do have anybody that's in a wheelchair or can't reach that high, you need to make sure that you've got accommodations for them to go give it to them around the sneeze guard and not up over the sneeze guard. Here's a close-up of that. And here, as you can see, there's little labels on the bottom of this station here. To me, they're too small. I like doing this, have fun with it. They're wipeable. They can be cleaned, use stickers, but make them really clear. And one thing that a lot of people have talked about, the director of sales in Milwaukee was saying that, and they've tested this by two different service styles, is that the plate, the server, there's a different attendant with each one of these chafing dishes. And so the plate goes down, follows the chafing dishes down, and is handed from server to server. They've timed that, but they also timed it that the server stays with the attendee and walks down the buffet aisle with them as well, and then hands it over. The timing, there was no difference in that timing, in that service method. So either way will work. And speaking of service methods and timing, is coffee breaks. Coffee breaks are not going to be self-serve. They're going to be served by an attendant. And somebody questioned, what's the timing of that as well? It's going to take a lot longer to have an attendant pour you coffee, but what's the difference of me standing in line to everybody makes their own coffee and stands there? You're still waiting. So it's really, the timing of that is minimal for having the server do it or having everyone do it themselves. So just thinking about that, but it does lend itself to changing our agendas to make sure that there are a minimal amount of people in those queues to get the food and stand in those lines. 6 feet, of course, as well. So figuring that out. Here's another thing from Spring USA. This is actually another mobile induction cart that can be used outside. It's got the air filtration system. And the one thing that I like about this, it's actually got a refrigerated drawers with food storage, and it's got a mobile hand washing station. And for somebody who, I used to do food festivals, that's actually a really good idea, because, you know, the health department requires a number of food hand washing stations per vendor. So that actually works really well. And again, I'm not getting any money from Spring USA. I liked what they were doing, and so I'm talking about it. Here's some other ones from that lounge. Well, now you probably can tell where I was, that I was in Denver, but here's the coffee again, and the hot water. That was all self-service. There was no one there, an attendant to help. On the plane, and all the alcohol was self-serve as well, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing in service methods as in general. On my flight, I was handed this plastic bag with my snacks in it. It was a bottle of water, 2 snacks, and a napkin. And my only issue with that is that I couldn't eat the snacks because neither one of them were gluten-free. And so I appreciated it, and I handed them back. I don't know if the flight attendant would then throw away those snacks because I had touched them, or if she would reuse them. So I don't know the answer to that, but that was a different way to do that. And I've heard that from several caterers that they are pre-plating different appetizers and things on that for reception styles and giving them to individuals, like, you know, on a board, and it's served to you at a table. And let's talk about floor plans a little bit. This has been a big conversation in a couple of Facebook feeds the last couple of days, that, you know, how many people go at a 72-inch round, or how many people go at a 40-inch or 60-inch round? If you look at the geometry on this, you can literally only put 3 people at a 72-inch round. Michael Dominguez and Alhai, they've been doing a couple of events, and a couple of other planners, and I'll show you some floor plans from somebody else. They've put more than 3 people at a table because they're putting them together by families, because there's been a lot of social events, or by office. If they've been working in that same office and they're coming together for a meeting, they're doing it that way. Michael mentioned that for one event that they did a couple of weeks ago, they did their breakout rooms, and Oscar, this will be a way to kind of figure out feeding 500 people. They broke it up into different rooms, and so, you know, they put the maximum number of people with the social distancing in different breakout rooms around the property. And then they came together into that cocktail reception area. And one thing that he did note was that alcohol is a good indicator of getting people to sit down, because if you weren't sitting down, you were not allowed to have a drink, because the server is serving you. So until everybody was seated, nothing was served. So that doesn't do that. But in that event that Michael did, he's like, we were seated together. It was pre-assigned seating, and it was 4 people to a table on a 72-inch round. And then the tables were released at one at a time, and room to go into the next room. And then you were pre-assigned to a table there. So it actually allowed for the networking event to happen, but in a fun and unique way. And the appetizers were pre-designed on one board that was handed to you. So instead of being passed out, you know, by a butler, it was actually laid in front of each of the attendees by a server. Here's an event that was done at the Fox Theater. It was a wedding, so there were more than 3 people at a table, and I think those were only 60-inch rounds. So again, they were positioned by families, or seated by families, so that it was one cluster of people that had been living together. And somebody was talking about seating on the Facebook group the other day. If ideally you want, well, not ideally, to maintain the social distancing, if you look on the map on my diagram on the right-hand side, you actually have to rotate the chairs to maintain the 6 feet. You can't actually make everybody the 6 foot, you know, you can't keep the chairs in the same position on every single table and maintain the 6-foot distance. The other thing too is, I think it was somebody mentioned California or Colorado was saying that you actually have to make sure that there's 12 feet between the tables to allow for people to pass through those tables. So, you know, to maintain a 6 feet distance. So it's a little bit hard, and depending, and with IAC properties that I know that are a lot smaller, it's going to be a challenge in figuring that out. I do think you could have fun with floor plans, you know, and doing, you know, not scavenger hunt, but treasure map routes that, hey, this is how you get through, you know, not a Where's Waldo thing, but you know, this is the map. This is how you traverse through the banquet room to get into there. Okay, enough about floor plans and seating and all of that. I wanted to talk to you about food safety and attendee concerns now. So this is coming from the International Food Information Council report. They've been doing reports every month and probably 2 a month since COVID started. And they do an annual report on food trends of attendees. And this is their food safety, consumer trends, habits, and attitudes report that came out last month, because today's October 1st. Are you concerned about the safety of your food when preparing food at home? And that's a note that this is at home, but it will be you know, their concerns to going to outside it will be seen as well. So it's pretty much split here, you know, very concerned, not that concerned, somewhat concerned. It's kind of an even split. So a quarter of your attendees, and this is where we talk about diversity and inclusion when you're talking about food and beverage as well, this is a whole new level of that. You know, how do you manage those different levels of concern with those attendees that are coming to your food and beverage events? So, you know, for that person who's not concerned at all, you know, I think we have to go through that and be in that middle to not concerned and somewhat concerned, create something that addresses all of those needs. And that's, you know, the sneeze guards and the masks, attendees or servers wearing masks and gloves and a variety of things. And speaking of gloves, I mentioned it in an article that I wrote. I'm like, let's, you know, plastic gloves or latex gloves or rubber gloves, you know, attendees are using or servers are using them, but can we upgrade it a little bit and use white gloves? And so that upgrades the service level as well. And makes that experience a little bit nicer for the attendees versus making it so sterile. This chart, lots of numbers and colors here, but areas of level of concern for food safety. So this is really food becoming contaminated. Somewhat concerned and very concerned. And that's almost 90%. Did I do that? 70 and it's 80, 84. No, I can't add. 8 and 6 is, what is 8 and 6? I can't add today. So anyways, a large number. And then food poisoning and foodborne illness, it's about the same. So, and then cooking meat to the right temperature. And again, this is doing it at home, but their concerns are going to be the same outside. Presence of allergens is 71% up there. So those are the biggest concerns that they have when they're cooking food at home, which is going to also transpire or relate to what we're cooking in our events. And the follow-up question to that was, do you try to avoid any ingredients when deciding what to eat and drink? And Nancy, this goes with understanding dietary needs. And 77% of the people said yes, which to me is astonishing number. I probably figured it to be about, 45 to 50%, but here's the ingredients. They asked them to do it. What foods are you avoiding? And this is really telling. Sugar is the #1, and then salt, and then meat, and then, and fat, but then dairy's up there. So what this shows you is that, and this is basically since COVID, and it was leaning towards this way a little bit before COVID, but people are really paying attention to what they're eating. They're wanting to eat healthier. They're wanting to eat foods that they can read the ingredients and are less manufactured than in previous times. And one other thing that's telling on this too is that community supported agriculture, CSA boxes or farm boxes, those requests for farm boxes are like at 400% of what they were last summer. And so more and more people are buying their food directly from the farmers that they know and at farmers markets, because it's not processed, it's local and it's fresh and it's seasonal. And in a lot of cases, it's organic or naturally grown. So that's another thing to think about when we're looking at our menus. Breaking that down a little bit more is like, and why are you avoiding these ingredients? And what I highlighted here, the number one reason is the safety, long-term health effects. So that to me is the sugar and the salt of that ingredient. The next one is the food allergens, because somebody has food allergies in their household. 20% was because of medical reasons, and 14% was because of spiritual and religious reasons. And one thing to note on this survey is that they were allowed to select multiple options. So you could have somebody who's selecting it, you know, for safety long-term, but they're also religious, right? So that's a combination. And that's where our managing our menus is really a bit challenging. Talking about allergens, and I don't know how many of you are open or have been open in providing any of this, but to-go boxes or shipping food home to your employees or to customers, you know, like using DoorDash and Grubhub and or Uber Eats, things like that. We have to be cognizant of who else is in that household. I called an employment lawyer here in the States just to ask this question, because my biggest concern is when we're sending food home to attendees or to our customers, you're intended to send it home to me, Tracy, right? And one, have you asked me about my dietary needs? That's great if you asked about me, but because you're sending it to my home, it's also, we should have the expectation that someone else in that home is also potentially going to eat that food that you send home. Whether it's a gift box, whether it's a cooking demo that you're doing, we need to make sure that we're not introducing any foods into that household that someone else can't eat. So if you've got kids or husbands or partners who have an allergy to something, we want to make sure that we're not introducing that into someone's home that could potentially get harmed. And of course, there's no precedent on this and doing this, but it's another level of duty of care that we need to pay attention to. And this is one other graphic slide about data, but this was really interesting to me on this one, that from the left, where it's left-hand side, this is going down in what brand perceptions consumers have of the brands and value. The number one thing that people are looking at now is the value for the money. So thinking about our food and beverage, what are we providing in our food and beverage, you know, in our box lunches, in our presentations that we're doing? Is that value to the planner as well as to the attendee there? Is that something that you would be proud of serving out to someone and also being worth the money that was spent? And I mean, this is a personal experience. The other day I went to dinner with my mom and my aunt, and we went to this restaurant in my town, and I've had okay meals from them, but the server that sat me said, all right, I'm gluten-free. Do you have a gluten-free menu? No, we don't. You can have, and the menu was 5 pages long, you know, folded over. And she's like, well, the only thing on the menu you could have is the salmon without the crust on it, the specialty crust that we do, and maybe a salad. And out of a 5-page menu, which probably was like 50 items. And I'm like, there's nothing else that I can have. And I was so hangry. I actually almost cried because it just pissed me off so badly, excuse me. But literally, and I said, can I talk to the chef? Is there something? Well, and so the server went in and talked to the chef and came back and said, yeah, your only option is the salmon. And then like 10 minutes later, she's like, oh, well, maybe you can have a burger without the bun on it. And that, to me, I ended up getting what they call their boring chicken option. And literally it was 2 pieces of grilled chicken, flattened out, very little flavor, and cold broccoli. And so to me, that value for the money is not there. And my chef friend, Nina Curtis from LA, she's like, would you be willing to, one, eat that yourself, and would you be proud to serve that? And thinking about all those dietary restrictions and the level of service that we're providing is really, really important in what we're doing as we're bringing people back, because to me, we want them to stay and come back and say, hey, this was a great property and this is great food here. One thing that I thought was really interesting in a story I found is this was done in the University of Texas, and with these glasses on, the university is helping this restaurant see how people read their menu, and the glasses let them pay attention to where the eyes are going and what they're reading, and how the color affects them, or what colors. So they ended up changing this entire slide or entire menu board because they were, I forgot exactly where they were looking, but they changed the order of the food, and they actually are making 20% more revenue now by changing the menu because of what the people were focusing on and where it was. And they also changed the coloring of the menu board. It was mostly blues and purples, as you can see here, and they turned it into a kind of reddish color like my shirt, because red makes you want to eat more. So it's interesting what we can do with that technology and looking at our menus and how we're designing them. With IAC properties, we have to think outside the meeting space. So that's our sundry shops. That is our room service, our mini bars, if we've got any of those, thinking about what options are there. Also talks about how to service it to those rooms. There's some events that have been done where the attendees stay put in their rooms for breakfast, and the event is broadcast to the TVs in the room, and their breakfast is delivered to their room. Not the servers don't come into the room, but it's delivered to them at their room. So that's another, how are you doing that? What's your room service opportunities, and what do you have on that menu? Communication is key. How are you communicating? This next slide is from an event that MPI Rocky Mountain did recently. And the first bullet, I think, is really, really important. Is you can't overdo it with the signs. They thought they had too many signs, and she said they didn't have enough. And just, even if it's the signs on the floors, it's the signs with the labeling. One of the things that they also said is planning for delays, because it does take a little bit longer to get people to the different spaces because of, timing wise, people being a little bit slower to get places, or not being able to see what's in the food because of its serving. So thinking about those things. And follow up and follow through, I think, is really, really important on that as well, both from the service side as well as the attendee side. Oops. Nancy, one of the things you asked me about was creating menus that meet multiple dietary needs. And I think this is really important to figure out. And, this is a grid that I've done before, and I've showed you guys this in the past. Taking your menus, and this is the prime time to do that when we're a little bit slower and figuring that out, is looking what menu items you have and identifying what those allergens and different ingredients are in those items, and saying, hey, I only have one vegan item on this whole entire menu. What can we do? And my suggestion is to start with a vegan menu and then add to it. And the adding to it would be, adding cheese on the side or adding croutons on the side. And those are very simplistic options, but, starting with the vegan menu as the base, which means cooking with oil or cooking with water, and not cooking with, butter, things like that. Note from a webinar that I sat in on last week, looking at the purple allergen-free equipment right there and talking food safety. The University of Boston Children's Hospital's celiac department is actually doing some research on this, testing equipment. and they looked at toasters, and the toasters that you all have in your kitchens that put the toast on it and spew it out versus a regular toaster. And they're looking at cross-contamination. And what they found is that soap and water and singing happy birthday while you wash that equipment is as effective of getting rid of the cross-contamination options. The parts per million of gluten in the toaster, and whichever toaster was less than the 20 parts per million. So somebody having a reaction is slim to none with that. They're doing more research on it, but it was a very good start on understanding that doing the proper cleaning of our equipment doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a whole new other set of equipment to create allergen free or celiac friendly food items. Communicating your menus across the board. A lot of technology is coming around. Restaurants are using QR codes for their menus and allowing people to order in advance. I don't know how likely that is for us to do when we're doing a 500-person event to do that, but it is a potential possibility with our event apps. Can we do that ordering in advance? Doing event tickets for bars, using a QR code. I mean, Delta gives me, tickets for, to get alcohol, right? They give me paper tickets. Well, they used to give paper tickets, and now it's on the Delta app. So if I want to order a drink on the airplane, I just have to show the flight attendant my app with the QR code, and they scan it, and then my ticket's gone. So how can you incorporate that into your event apps or into your restaurant menu technology? I put this picture up here in the middle. It's a box lunch, and there's a lot of bento boxes and things like that coming out, which is great, but a lot of times they don't have labeling on them. And so being really clear on that labeling, what's in it, is if I'm going to pick it up and take it away and walk it away, having labeling on that for attendees to know what they're eating is really important. Don't use a marker to scratch out what's wrong with your bacon. There's bread underneath that, and so it made that bacon not gluten-free. Registration systems, collecting the information in advance and communicating it to the staff is really important into getting this right. Contracts, and I'm going to go through these last things because I want to take questions. I know we've got 5 more minutes because we're open. We're open. Here's my slide or my information. The last line here on the bottom is I have a podcast called Eating at a Meeting, and that launched last month. And Mark, our illustrious Mark Cooper, is one of my guests on that podcast, and that is the actual link to his podcast. But if you go onto any of the platforms, you can find, if you just search for Eating at a Meeting, you will find the podcast. And then I also have a Facebook group called Eating at a Meeting. It's a free Facebook group that we just talk about everything food and beverage. And I'm going to hit stop share if anybody needs me to come back. All right. I talked a lot. Kate, what questions do I have?
I haven't got any questions at the minute, guys. So anyone want to use the chat box or have their mics opened?
All right. Nancy mentioned coffee breaks, to-go cups versus mugs. Good question. That really depends on the property and the staffing that they have at the property. Because if they don't have the staff, the culinary staff there to clean all the dishes, recyclable coffee mugs to go is probably going to be your best bet. But the most sustainable option is definitely using coffee mugs that can be washed. But I think it depends on the staffing capability of the property as we move forward currently, and then as we move forward. Pre-pours with milk, black, etc. I think that's, I don't know. I think somebody's going to come and it's going to serve your coffee so they can make the coffee there. One of the properties is doing all prepackaged, service salts and peppers and ketchups and creamers and things like that. So it might be done that way.
Quick question in from Jeannie Han, actually. Yes, Jean, we are going to send the presentation on, and I'll send the recording of Tracy's session as well.
All All right, okay, Nancy, you put all these to me privately, so I'm just going to say them all, just so you know. There is a color box on your screen, bottom corner. I don't know what that means. What are you trying to tell me? Kate.
That was me.
Okay. Food service manager on site. That, Nancy, that is a food service manager. So every property is required to have at least one food service manager on property at all times, at least in the States. Oscar and Mark, tell me if that's different where you guys are. And it's important to make sure that that person's there. So if they might have 3 or 4, or they might, but you got to have one on site at all times. Food coloring dyes, avoid all of them potentially. Yes, that is a big issue with a lot of different food products out there. Okay, and nobody has any other questions?
No questions?
Please, I like questions. I'm gonna, I'll go back to share screen and put my slides up, or that last slide up. Where did I go? Oops, keynote, escape out of that. Okay, there's that.
There we go.
All right, but nobody has any questions? Okay, Kate.
No? Well, thank you, everybody.
No.
Just to reiterate, Tracy, thanks for your time as always.
You're welcome.
We will send the presentation, obviously, we'll send the recording. As always, please check out the lineup for the rest of October. We have a number of webinars coming up this month. Our next one is on food and beverage trends with Mark Cooper on the 14th of October. So get yourselves registered for that one. And a number of sessions coming up to tell you more about our new multi-pod, which we launched yesterday, which is an exciting time. So please take a look and join us for those sessions. I wish you all well, stay safe, and have a great rest of your day.
Hey, Kate, I have one more question from Nancy.
Go for it.
She said, talking about floor plans, I'm working on several future events. Am I planning for 3 to 6 inch tables, 3 to 6 foot tables now for a 2025 or later event, or for return from our traditional seating? I hope to God, Nancy, that in 5 years we're back to traditional seating. It would be, I think we're going to be back. Our new normal changes constantly. It changed after 9/11. It's changing now. And what we're seeing now is going to be incorporated a little bit, but I think we will get back to seeing more people at tables and not so spread out, because, and I don't like to use the word social distancing. I like to use the word physical distancing, because we still need to be social, and that's what the events are for, networking and being social. But, you know, we might take some of these fun concepts from what we're learning here and keeping them, because they will still work. I hope that answers your question. You're welcome, Sean. Thank you. Thanks for everybody being here.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.